In the 1960s, life was quieter. People were more relaxed, and on railway branch lines, some employees of British Rail did things that would be unthinkable today in this 21st century, where safety standards are constantly under scrutiny. A DMU on its way to Gunnislake from Bere Alston in Devon. It's not in a hurry. In fact, the driver suddenly realises that tomorrow is Mothering Sunday. And since he has no mobile phone to ring into Flora, he stops his train to pick daffodils for Mother from the side of the line. By the way, don't try this at home, especially if you're an HST driver watching. Railtrack would not be amused. Come to think of it, BRHQ would have probably had a seizure if they'd known about this. Doesn't this epitomise the 1950s and 60s, when life was enjoyed at a slower pace and what the heck attitude preceded troubled times ahead, especially for the branch lines of the United Kingdom? Fortunately, this one is still operational, in part anyway, but there's a big story to tell about its history and lots of experiences that will recall memories of a spectacular West Country branch line. It will include the events surrounding the last train to Callington. In the late 19th century, the area above the River Tamar just west of Calstock and Gunnislake and reaching as far as Kithill was potted with tin and arsenic in mines. Excavation meant wealth to their owners. In those days, lotteries were virtually unheard of, so people worked to make money. Transportation to the river port of Morwellum on the Devon bank of the river was essential to ensure the exportation of the mined products. That's tin, copper and arsenic. Arsenic? Oh well. Hence, on the Cornish banks of the Tamar, small mineral railways were born around the industrious centres of the river. On the 9th of August 1869, permission was obtained to build an 8-mile, 3'6" narrow gauge track from Callington to Calstock, and this came into operation on the 8th of May 1872. There were no passengers originally, just truckloads of coal to Callington gasworks and mineral transportation to and from the mines at Calstock Quay, where barges handled the freight for transportation to Plymouth as a main port and link to the rest of the world. The prominent point on the line was the 800-foot incline with a crossing loop from Calstock Quay to a point about 350 foot above, where the necessary marshalling was carried out before the journey to Kelly Bray. The 1-in-6 gradient was worked on a counterbalance principle with the assistance of a stationary engine housed at the top of the incline, the maximum load being 2 loaded or 3 empty wagons. From this marshalling yard at the top of the incline, the trains were worked forward by 2 identical 040 saddle tank steam locomotives built in 1871 by Neilson & Co. of Glasgow. And during the 1860s, the mining industries prospered in the Tamar Valley. But as the Industrial Revolution progressed, a depression set in, and this brought many changes to the area and a new competition from the LSWR. In June of 1882, the directors approved a motion to sell off the East Cornwall Mineral Railway. The London and South Western Railway completed the extension of its tracks from Lidford to Plymouth through Tavistock North on the 2nd of June 1890. They had their eye on the passenger potential of the Callington to Bere Alston route, so in 1891 took over the East Cornwall Mineral Railway, which had already been absorbed into the Plymouth, Devonport and South Western Junction Railway. The conversion from narrow gauge to standard gauge was then undertaken. Now it was just a short route across the Tamar to Calstock and into the eastern areas of Cornwall. In those days, the branch line starting at Bere Alston could be accessed by way of the LSWR's main line from Plymouth, Devonport, Kings Road, Ford, Camel's Head, St Budo Victoria Road, Tamerton Folliot, Bere Ferrers, and finally Bere Alston. From Exeter Queen Street on the southern region, the line would have passed through Exeter St David's, Newton St Sires, Crediton, Yeoford, Bow, North Taunton, Stamford Courtenay, Oakhampton, Bridestow, Lidford, Brentor, Tavistock North, and finally Bere Alston. And from Bere Alston the branch train would have followed the line across the Tamar into Calstock, Gunnislake, Chilsworthy, Latchley, Sevenstones Halt, Luckett, and into Callington, stopping short about a mile north of the town at Kelly Bray. It's sort of in the middle of nowhere, a mile or so from the village of Bere Alston, quiet, reserved, and always with an anticipation that something will come blasting through like the Waterloo to Plymouth Express, or trains hauled by the Great West Country class bullied Pacifics of yesterday, thundering and challenging speed barriers. In fact, just the other side of Bere Alston, on its approaches to Tavistock, expresses could often reach in excess of 80 miles per hour. Imagine the sound of that. But only the quiet purr of commuter DMUs drown out the country noises of the station today. It's here at Bere Alston that the highlight of the day is the changing of the points to send the unit out of the station towards the Calstock viaduct. So little noise to accompany this train. In fact, the present owners of part of the station, Fay and Carl Jones, don't even hear the modern-day DMUs. Carl sleeps soundly through the ritual, while the link buses from the village always wake him up. If Wales and West Railways of the 21st century know where this obscure West Country station is... Oh, hang on a minute. Someone's painted the old signal box just a few weeks ago, so they must be lurking around somewhere. Isn't it quiet here? But things were so much different in the 1950s. It served three main routes, through Tavistock North and into London, into Plymouth and through to Callington. Then there was the produce of Jack Bickle, Cliff Lawrence, Bill Cole and Mr Breen from Coat Hill, amongst others. 28 churns of milk a day carried through the branch to Bere Alston, attached to the passenger express to Friary for the Plymouth Co-op. Thursdays Ron Bolt would send his day-old chicks to various destinations. Then there was sugar beet, peas and beans from Mr Plum's farm. Not to mention the lady farm workers arriving in droves of 6 or 7 from Gunnislake or St Budo. Jack Kurzweil's open-top van would collect all and sundry at 8 a.m. and return them in less alert condition at 5 p.m. for dispatch second class to their home destinations, until tomorrow anyway. But that was yesterday. It's all gone now, just a ghost of an age gone by. A station with only platforms in use and a well-oiled and rail-track maintained point controller. The train comes in and goes out, and who really notices it other than the driver and a few passengers travelling the line for the first time? A sort of, what's that driver doing with that lever? After leaving Bere Alston, the line runs down a long twisting gradient, and passengers can delight at views of the Tamar Valley. A cutting and small woods leads to Calstock Viaduct, a superb structure and a landmark in the valley today, towering majestically above the dwelling and millionaire hideouts along the riverbank. The LSWR contracted John Charles Lang of Liskeard to build this one. His original estimate of £48,000 was short of £6,700 odd. He was also short of a good cost accountant by the sounds of it. But the LSWR paid the extra without a fight, and the viaduct was completed. Devonshire and Cornwall were connected across the River Tamar with this 12-spanned magnificent-looking brick structure. It was 120 feet high, with spans 60 feet apart. And on the 6th of February 1908, the Board of Trade Inspectors, maybe overcome with awe, declared the structure safe. And on the 2nd of March, the branch line opened. The old stationary engine that hauled cars up the incline from Calstock Quay was pensioned off in 1913. After all, it had been redundant since the erection of the wagon hoist for raising or lowering cars from the quay. The Plymouth, Devonport and South West Junction Railway Company had this one built as a matter of ongoing economy. But even this was abandoned in 1934 after a decline of minerals to be shipped on the line. Ah well, that's progress indeed. On the Cornwall side of the bridge, the train manoeuvres a sharp curve into the awkwardly built Calstock station. Old British Rail's economy version here. A small platform shelter, a few seats and prominent notice board. Unmanned and virtually vandal-free in this part of the world where the most serious of crimes is scrumping. Under LSWR and British Railways there were more in the way of buildings, but everything had a ramshackle appearance, with wooden construction and clad with corrugated iron. Well, that was bad enough, but the rot was to set in further with the lack of staff to maintain a daily maintenance of the station. Opened on the 2nd of March 1908, the station had a signal box and a short goods loop. There was no downside platform. In the station's small goods yard on the downside up to the late 1960s, thousands of boxes of fruit and flowers from the Tamar Valley Gardens awaited loading to markets in London, the north of England and Scotland. In those days the staff took pride in the state and running of the station, but things would change for the worse. Because of gradients on this area of line, John Snell remembered the times when goods trains would run away here. They would rush through Calstock, having been helped by gravity down the 350-foot drop from Gunnislake, hurry over the viaduct and in the wet stop on their way up the incline to Bere Alston. They would then push back into Calstock station. A bit of a Big Dipper ride of sorts. And chips were manufactured in great quantity in the Tamar Valley, but these were not to feed the hungry masses. 10 trucks at any given time could cram into Calstock station goods area to receive the timber for the factory where chips were to be manufactured. Charlie Walters and Hedley Gary were in charge, chippers of the highest grade indeed. It's now a 4.5 mile route to Gunnislake station. Over 130 years ago, this stretch of countryside would have been a hive of building activity. Navvies, sometimes accompanied by their wives and families, contracted by the East Cornwall Mineral Railway, would have worked from sunrise to sunset for 2 and 6pence per day. There was rough living, hard drinking and swearing, occasional riots and fights. And the men were just as bad. Attitudes that were most unwelcome in the area. One navvy reportedly worked overtime, earned 5 and 6pence, and travelled all around the area until he could find a pub that would serve him, and there he spent a lot on drink. Richard Church was the LSWR's main man on this stretch of line, and during construction many landowners objected to the building programme. They just wouldn't listen to reason. Church had difficulty in listening to their objections too. He was partially deaf and had to be spoken to loudly through a tube acting as a deaf aid. Now that would have made interesting viewing. "You're not coming through my land." "What did you say?" "I said you can't build that railway here." "Eh?" "Oh, forget it." Well, the line was completed at a cost of £180,000, so London is not the only part of England connected with tubes. Having passed Calstock Church and Oakle Tor, the journey now takes us to the terminus of the line today, Gunnislake Station. This is situated on the south side of the A390 and is one of those park and ride terminus stations. Unmanned, uninteresting, and certainly unworthy of such a lovely branch line. It was actually sited here as late as 1994, and until that time the main station was just across the A390, accessed by way of a low bridge which had to be demolished by Cornwall County Council due to height restrictions. During the resiting, the line between Calstock and Gunnislake was closed for traffic for some 4 months. The LSWR originally built the station high above the main part of the large Tamar Valley mining village that it served. It was basic in design, not unlike Calstock, but with corrugated sections, and had extensive sidings on the west side of the island platform. It also had the exclusive luxury of a double-sided canopy. Until 1966, Callington had been the main terminus of the line through the Tamar Valley, but after its closure, Gunnislake became the terminus of the line, which soon deteriorated with only one track left in use. The former island platform Bere, apart from a small shelter, and the former goods yard, a rubbish-filled car park. This was the sign of things to come, a legacy of growing careless standards in society. It was here in better days that cider apples were loaded to white ways of Wimple under the direction of Mr. Sleeman of Albaston. Pit props were exported from Gunnislake by the Duke of Bedford Woods at Gulworthy for the coal mines of Wales and the north of England. By the way, each station had its own internal telephone code, and Gunnislake was 4. Here we are in the 21st century, and this is the site on which busy Gunnislake station used to sit. Hard to imagine that it used to accommodate up to 80 passengers a day, not to mention the goods activity. And then there was steam, steam and more steam, all gone now. All that are left are the memories, and even these are decaying in today's world, more worthy of fast living, profit-making, lotteries and perishing accountants with their number-crunching activities. Now we're on the stretch of line that's no longer operational. We're on our way to Callington. Well, Kelly Bray anyway. Next stop, Chilsworthy! Chilsworthy! Good morning, sir. The train should be through any minute now. I wonder who that is over there, all smartly dressed, relaxing against the fence. Could it be John Snell? Probably not, since his photograph was taken in 1910. Well, that would make him over 100 years old. Whoever he is, I don't like the look of him. He's up to something. Perhaps it's the LSWR auditor. No, he only visited man stations. This is Chilsworthy Halt, opened on the 1st of June 1909. It was a basic stopping point, built of stone covered with compacted chippings. A 4-star, now a 3-star, perhaps 2-star. No, I don't think this corrugated iron shelter would have any stars at all. At least it has an oil lamp to see which side of the train to get on. One thing's for sure, you can see fantastic views of the Tamar Valley from here. The train should be along any minute now, sir. Who is that man? We're now some 6.5 miles from Bere Alston and on our way to Latchley. Before Latchley station was built, the site was known as Cox's Park Depot and served a mineral point for the nearby quarry. Named after the village some 1.5 miles to the north, this was another of those basic stations. The shelter here could protect crowds of passengers from the elements. At least 3 at a time could squeeze into the luxury of a tinned-roofed halt-styled Hilton. Try saying that with your teeth out. In the 1940s, some 10 passengers a day would use this halt. If all at once, they would have to take turns to use the shelter. A distinctive character of this little country station was the ungated crossing. Lookout engine drivers and road users alike. Freight ceased to be handled here in 1949, and everything closed on the 7th of November 1966 with the other stations between Callington and Gunnislake. If you blink, you'll miss it. Sevenstones Halt opened in 1910, and it was here that Sunday school parties laden with picnic hampers would arrive to enjoy James Venning's facilities at the Phoenix Pleasure Grounds. Between June and September of 1914, 5 trains a day would stop here, 6 on Sundays. Some notices suggested that as many as 700 in a day would have visited from Plymouth, with trains hauling additional coaches. It's a strange spot today, bare and open to the 4 winds. A platform that was never used after 1917. Luckett was originally known as Monk's Corner Depot before the LSWR constructed a station here in 1908. It changed names again to Stoke Climsland in 1909 and subsequently to Luckett. It had a passing loop, a few short sidings and a loading dock. And the station building was constructed of wood with corrugated iron, although less conspicuous than in the previous stations. By the way, if you wanted to reach Luckett on the internal phone system, you would have dialed 2-1. That tended to indicate the nature of the station, usually busy and important. It was just to the northeast of Kithill, and high above the village of the same name some 2 miles away. On a short goods loop was the track of an inclined tramway, which ran off from the route to serve Kithill Quarry. It's that man from Chilsworthy. Good morning, sir. Nice day again. Who the heck is he? The station house is still very much in evidence, and the present owners have created a true memorial to this, the penultimate station to Callington. It's found halfway down a hill from the road into Kelly-Bray. The overbridge is deteriorating fast, but there can be no mistaking the station site. I know I shouldn't feel envious, but this will do nicely for my retirement. I'll just check my piggy bank. Well, here we go on the final run into Callington. And even though the track has long gone, the bed and route is still indelibly marked on the landscape, although there would be far too many obstacles to relay the track through to the terminus today. I don't suppose anyone would want to now anyway. Down there was where driver Frankie Woods worked until his retirement. He started in the East Cornwall Mineral Railway days. Then there was Bill May, driver in charge, and Jack Wickett, famous for never letting a train slip even in misty, damp weather with a heavy train. This made him superior, since other trains slipped regularly. On this stretch, veteran Arthur Westington remembers his colleague Percy Lang, who was late with his train. An inspector came to see him. "Driver Lang," he said, "you lost some time last week with one of our Adams tanks." Percy's typical LSWR reply, "Well, that's not surprising, boss, since Adam built it." It's nearly the end of the line. There's Kelly-Bray down there. That's the old station site. Now just an industrial area. And just over there in the distance is the town of Callington, about a mile away. A nice little Cornish town, but no station. Actually, in 1895 there was a public meeting where a railway from Saltash to Callington was proposed, passing through St Melian and St Dominic, with its terminus on the north side of the town. The cost accountants had budgeted just under £100,000, and in 1900 the proposers obtained the Callington Light Railway order. At last a station for Callington. Nope. By 1909 no work had started, and the GWR introduced a bus service from Saltash, and this was considered adequate. No station for the town of Callington. Never mind. But just up the road was Kelly-Bray. Now that would just have to do. Today, just an everyday industrial estate, quite ordinary really, nothing to shout about, hardly recognisable as an old busy station site. But it was, and here are the images to prove it. When the East Cornwall Mineral Railway opened on the 7th of May 1872 to serve the mining industry, it was simply known as Kelly-Bray, situated about 1 mile from the main town of Callington. The LSWR renamed it Callington Road when passenger traffic began on the 1st of November 1909. Until 1949 its authentic title was Callington for Stoke Climsland. It bore a distinctive covered roof, and to its last days was a testimony to the station staff in that it was usually kept neat, tidy and clean. Some even ventured to say that it was the best kept station on the southern region for many years. A two-road locomotive shed enabled power units to be housed and minor repairs undertaken on site. There was a parcels office, booking office and waiting room, and being a terminus it needed adequate passenger facilities. At the Luckett end there was a small signal cabin and ground frame, and around here it was not unusual to find stray chickens and sometimes sheep on the tracks, for it was from here that cattle would be dispatched for various destinations. Around 1953 the first train of the day would have been the 5:20 a.m. passenger service, arriving at Bere Alston at 6:08 a.m. for connection with the Plymouth service. Then, of course, Callington Station was the father of all stations on the branch. After all, it had electricity there. You could say it was really switched on, and far superior to those oil lamps at Luckett, Latchley and Chilsworthy. Even Gunnislake had gas and Calstock Tilly lamps. In the 1960s, seeds from the Tamar Valley were loaded regularly for dispatch, and this scene shows loading just before the station's closure in 1966. By the way, if you wanted to call Callington on the internal telephone system, your code would have been 13. Aha, it's that man from Chilsworthy again. We know who you are now, Dr. Beeching, and we know what you want. The journey from Bere Alston to Callington from the helicopter gave a geographical view of the entire trackbed. The railway line still there to Gunnislake, but sadly missing to Callington. But don't despair. What BR disposed of, certain amateur cinematographers kept on film as memories, so we can now make the return journey from Callington to Bere Alston with this unique and rare amateur archive footage. It even includes views from the cab of a DMU in the 1960s. Obviously, some of the footage's quality leaves a little to be desired, but the images are unique and very important to our journey into the past. John Snell, now retired and living with his wife Iris in Bere Alston, worked the branch from 1949. He recollects with fond affection his days on the railway and the companionship of his fellow workers.
Yeah, I started on the 4th of April 1949 as a junior clerk at Calstock station. And the station master there at that time was Mr. Tubb. He was in charge of Calstock, Gunnislake and Chilsworthy. At the end of the line, when I started at the terminus Callington, the station master was Mr. Lazenberry, and he was in charge of Callington, Luckett and Latchley. And the junction station at Bere Alston was the station master was Mr. Skinner, and of course that was a busy junction because that dealt with all the branch. But my main job was at that time was as the fruit and flower traffic was dispatched, when we had to charge it all, they would send it on consignment notes, bring the consignment notes in, we'd have to charge it to the various cities. There were different charges for each town. Approximately 100 weight of flowers going to Covent Garden in London was, when I started, was 10 shillings. So that's 50p today. But we had to charge it all up, weigh bill it, send the weigh bills with the traffic, and of course at the end of the week we had to prepare the accounts and send them out to the growers, and the week after usually they would come in and pay, and we had to keep account of it all. It was like a family really. I mean, it was you're all friends together. And what we used to have, and most people attended, we had a first aid class at Bere Alston on Thursday nights. This was in the winter months. In all grades, the engineers would come, and the clerical staff and porters, signalmen, to learn first aid, and about 30 people would attend that, and that was always like a social evening out really. And then we would also have rules and regulation classes. They used to learn us the rules of the railway rule book and signaling, and that was held Monday nights at Bere Alston. Mr. Skinner would be our teacher. And a lot of people used to go to that, and you were mixed in, you see, proper family.
These unique images recall events that are now long gone. A DMU special packed with enthusiasts from Plymouth visits old Gunnislake station sometime in the 1970s. Hey there, get off that line. Passengers must not trespass on the line. Good grief, they'll be picking daffodils for mother next. Note the plush station building with its beautifully kept exterior. Now its brief encounter at Bere Alston. Well, that's the way it was when John Snell met his wife Iris in 1950. A cup of British Railways tea sealed John's fate.
Yeah, I met Iris when I was a booking clerk here at Bere Alston. It was in the 1950. I came up here in 1950. And one afternoon I had my tea, but I had to go out on the platform with it, and she thought I'd dropped the cup, you see, but I hadn't really. And she was friendly with the station master and his wife, and the station master's wife said, "Oh, John has lost his tea cup, his tea, so you better take him out another one." So of course Iris brought me out this cup of tea, and that's how it started really. And we married eventually, but that's how I first met Iris. Bere Alston Station, yeah, 1950.
In 1958, it wasn't leaves that stopped the train, but a new menace invaded the railway line, causing the train to slip. Was it snow? Was it vandals? No, it was caterpillars, thousands of them crossing the line all at once. The 443 from Calstock had to stop, and the driver had to pour sand over the mangled bodies so that the train could resume its journey up the bank to Bere Alston. If only they'd used the level crossing. During the Second World War, evacuees from Plymouth came to the Tamar Valley to shield themselves from the intense bombing raids of 1941. John Snell explains.
In 1940-41, when the Blitz in Plymouth was on, I mean, loads of people had to come out to the countryside, Bere Alston, Gunnislake, Calstock, places like that, and they would stay overnight. They would stay in the local churches, chapels and schools. No beds would be provided, but they would just sleep on the floor, but they would be outside the Blitz, you see.
Does John feel that the remaining line will ever close?
Yeah, well, I think it is important that the line remains because of especially road access, say from the Bere Peninsula, because the road access is not good, you see, and it's a very important link, and also to the other side, the Tamar Valley, Gunnislake and Calstock. I think it's they could only take way of getting into Plymouth, which is the main centre, you see.
And what about introducing steam back onto the branch as a tourist attraction?
I think that would be very difficult because there was always a problem with water, and they could only take water at Calstock and Callington station. Of course, Callington station is no longer there, but that would be a problem to supply the water, and I suppose coaling facilities, they could overcome that, but it would mean large tankers, I think, for water.
And on a lighter note, what about the workers? This photograph shows the Gunnislake station staff in June of 1950. From left to right, John Snell, Rex Phillips, Jock Thompson, George Symes, Ron Pote and George Jury. And not of course forgetting Callington driver Bernard Mugridge enjoying his Cornish pasty lunch. For the more discerning rail enthusiast, we can now recap and closely identify some of the more prominent steam-powered units used on the branch. This Nielsen & Co. 040 3'6" saddle tank worked the line in the East Cornwall Mineral Railway days from 1871. It was one of a pair. 060 side tank, built by Hawthorne Leslie, works number 2697 with outside cylinder, hauled passenger traffic on arrival for the Plymouth, Devonport and South Western Junction Railway. When it arrived, the manufacturers had wrongly painted H.S. Harris on the side instead of A.S. Harris, the railway's director. PD and SWJR Class 757 Earl of Mount Edgecombe was built by Hawthorne Leslie and used on the line from 1907. The Lord St Leven, also 757 class, was its twin sister. Both were used on the branch until 1957. Adams 02004 tanks were extensively used for freight and passengers, as seen here with 30236. 30183, 30192, 30216 and 30225 were also used in this class. Regular working units from Plymouth calling at Bere Alston included this Drummond M7 class. Ivett LMS 262 tanks such as 41275 were used in later years. 41315, 41316 and 41302 were also used extensively pre-dieselisation. I'll let John Snell fill in any gaps.
The main, when I started, it was they had the two original Plymouth, Devonport and South Western Junction 062 engines. That was the Earl of Mount Edgecombe 757 and the Lord St Leven 758. One of them was always kept at Callington together with a Adams 02, and that's how the line was worked really. Mainly was one of the Earl of Mount Edgecombe or Lord St Leven with an Adams 02, and then a second Adams 02 would come up from Friary about 9 o'clock in the morning. So then you had three engines working the trains, but it was Earl of Mount Edgecombe or Lord St Leven or an Adams 02 tank. That was mainly the at the start, and then eventually they were replaced by the Ivett LMS Ivett 262 tanks, which was the last in steam out on the line. Rarely, I did see a tender engine, and that was an Adams 395060 tender. They had that one when there was water shortages, but it was never a very successful engine. It wasn't very powerful, and they would get rid of that as quickly as possible, actually.
By 1966, Mr. Beeching had become notorious in railway circles. The Western region was enthusiastically implementing closures in the west, with the network beyond Exeter savagely reduced. Bere Alston to Oakhampton was to close, and the Callington branch was to be terminated at Gunnislake. So, on Saturday the 5th of November 1966, the last trains of the full service to and from Callington were well patronised, so much so that Callington actually ran out of train tickets. Rail enthusiasts from all parts joined staff to say farewell to Chilsworthy, Latchley, Luckett and Callington stations. Normal services ran throughout that day, and the images you are viewing are of one of the last services from Bere Alston. The Lanson Railway Circle placed a wreath on the 740 out of Callington inscribed, "With loving memory, goodbye my friend, this is the end." The driver of the last train was Sid Whiteway and the guard L. Hooper. And early in the day, officials of Callington Council turned up to pay their respects, and a talk by D.A. Trevanion, president of the Old Cornwall Society, was given, a sort of requiem. So, what you are viewing now is unique history. Indeed, you've actually come aboard the last train to Callington. John Snell remembers that day well.
Yeah, I was the late turn that day, and a lot of people from Bere Alston went down to see the last train off. It was 10:05. Of course, they couldn't travel on him because there was no return service, you see, but they did go down and see him all. And people from Callington, I think they came over on the 9:30, I think it was, in the evening from Callington to Bere Alston, and then they returned, of course, on the same train. But in the Launceston Railway Circle came and supported the event, and they put a wreath on the front of the, it was a diesel unit at that time, you see. But yeah, there was a lot of people about that night down the station, and a bit of a sad time, I think, really, like, you know. Yeah, they were well, pretty upset, really, because they felt it was, there was still a lot of traffic coming out of the, like Inkson Down Quarry was, at that time, it was still sending a lot of traffic, and Callington with animal feedstuffs and things like that, and they felt that the railway deliberately, like, didn't canvass for traffic or to encourage more traffic. They just wanted to close it, like, you know. I think that was the attitude.
There's sadness in the valley, there's silence on the track, there's no more M7 Drummonds, the O2s won't be back. The Earl of Mount Edgecombe and the Lord St Leven too, they've been consigned to scrapyards, their working days are through. No more passengers at Latchley, Chilsworthy's days have gone, Luckett will see no more trains, 'tis the end at Callington. There's sadness in the valley, there's silence on the track, they're ripping up the railway, it's gone, it won't be back. The track consigned to history, passengers were few, no more the nighttime sights and sounds of train friends passing through. There's sadness in the valley, there's silence on the track, there'll be no more 8:35 to Bere Alston and back. No more meeting up of loved ones as trains draw to a halt, no tickets please will again be heard. Who really is at fault? The branch is closed, there's no more cash, accountants got their way. This is the end, goodbye my friend, dear Callington Railway. But stem despair, there still remains a remnant of the line. Though cut short at Gunnislake today, it stands the test of time. From Bere Alston station fair to Calstock each weekday, then on to Gunnislake, the end. The trains are here to stay.
The time is 1200. This station is Bere Alston. The next train to arrive at this station in the direction of Plymouth will be the 12:40 Wales and West service to Plymouth.